No one but my mother, and I know that almost every meal I make for her is revenge. I have never told anyone this, not even my husband, but it happened again tonight and I'm feeling a bit giddy because of how well it worked yet again, so I want to brag. I'm aware I'm a piece of shit. Part of why I haven't told anyone. When I was little, my mother wanted to use corporal punishment on me, not my siblings, never my siblings, but because I was such a bad kid she wanted my dad to hit me. My dad flat out refused, and told her that if she did, he wouldn't be able to stay with her, because he didn't want anyone hitting his kids. My dad was abused pretty badly as a kid, whole other story, can't get into it too much or we'd be here all day. So, instead, whenever my mom was mad at me she would give me spicy food to eat, even though I hated it and it made me sick. Like, full-on stomach cramps, diarrhea, the works. She would only do it when my dad was at work, which was most nights at dinner, and whenever I asked for something else to eat she would break down and cry over how much time she spent on my food, and don't I love her. Guilting me into hurting myself. When I turned 16, I was meant to start taking over more of the chores in the house, including cooking dinner twice a week. My mother hates pasta. She hates it. It's a texture thing, and she claims it's always slimy. One brilliant night at 16, after my father began working morning shifts, I was mad at her for screaming at me earlier in the day, and I realized I could do something about it. Since that night, the one meal I have consistently cooked for my mother is pasta. I load it with sauce, and sometimes make things like baked spaghetti because she hates the way the top of it looks. Whenever she's tried to turn it down, I put on Waterworks and shake, and look at the table. You've always eaten it before, what did I do wrong? Are you mad at me, Mom? And because either my dad or my husband, or other people whose opinions she cares about are there, she's never called me out. I am 26 years old and I intend to do this for every meal we share, or until she cuts me off. I'm not gonna be seen as the bad guy here for not keeping the family together. I honestly don't care if this makes me a bad guy. She sucked and this is my pettiest form of revenge. Watching her try to keep a straight face while choking down chicken Alfredo is the highlight of my week. Tonight, I watched her struggle with another plate of pasta, her face twisted in barely concealed disgust. As I cleared the table, she excused herself to the bathroom, leaving her phone behind. A message popped up on the screen. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at it. It was a text from an unknown number, reading, "We need to talk about what you did." I know everything. My heart raced. Who could this be? What did they know? I quickly put the phone back and pretended nothing had happened. But a cold dread settled in my stomach. Was someone onto me, or was there something even darker about my mother's past that I didn't know? As I washed the dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to unravel, something that could turn my small act of revenge into a much bigger nightmare. The night felt like it stretched on forever. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the text message from the unknown number looping in my mind. I couldn't help but wonder who it was and what they meant by, "I know everything." The next morning, my mother acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me over breakfast, her usual mask of calm firmly in place. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I decided to take a closer look at her phone later, once she left for her weekly grocery shopping. Around noon, my chance came. She grabbed her purse and keys, giving me a quick, tight-lipped smile before heading out. As soon as I heard her car pull away, I sprinted to her room. Her phone was right where she left it, plugged in on her nightstand. Hands shaking, I unlocked it using the code I'd seen her input 1,000 times. The message from last night was still there, and I scrolled through the rest of her recent texts. Most were mundane, from friends and family, but then I found a thread with the same unknown number. The latest message sent chills down my spine. "I will be at your house tonight. We need to talk about her." No more delays. Who was this person? And what did they want to talk about with my mother, and more importantly, about me? I copied down the number and put the phone back just as it was. That evening, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept watching the clock, waiting for my mother to return, and dreading the arrival of this mysterious visitor. When my mother came home, she acted like it was any other day, completely oblivious to the tension I felt. After dinner, which I made sure included her least favorite pasta dish, she went to her room, claiming she had a headache. I knew it was only a matter of time before the visitor arrived. I stationed myself in the living room, pretending to watch TV but keeping an eye on the front door. Around 9, there was a soft knock. My heart leapt into my throat. I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. A man stood there, tall and imposing, his face partially hidden by a hood. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to see your mother," he said, his voice deep and calm. "We have some unfinished business." I hesitated, then let him in. He walked past me without another word, heading straight for my mother's room as if he knew the layout of our house. I followed at a distance, my mind racing. When he reached my mother's door, he knocked once, then pushed it open. My mother looked up, her face draining of color when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear. Their voices were low, but I caught snippets of the conversation. "Can't keep this up forever, she's starting to suspect, if she finds out the truth." My blood ran cold. What truth? What were they hiding from me? I felt like my world was spinning out of control. And then, the man said something that made my heart stop. "She has a right to know who her real father is." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. My real father. My mother had always told me my dad was my biological father. What else had she lied about? I needed answers, but I knew bursting in now would only make things worse. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Who was this man? What did he mean by real father? And how much more was my mother hiding from me? The conversation continued behind the closed door, but I couldn't focus on their words anymore. I needed to figure out what was going on, but I had no idea where to start. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Just as I decided to retreat to my room, the front door opened, and my husband walked in. He looked at me, a mix of concern and confusion on his face. "What's going on?" he asked. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say a word, the door to my mother's room flew open. The man stormed out, his face a mask of anger, and brushed past us without a word. My mother stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me, then at my husband, and said, "We need to talk. All of us." The weight of her words hung in the air, a promise of revelations that could shatter everything I thought I knew. The tension in the room was palpable as we gathered in the living room. My mother sat across from me, her face pale and drawn. My husband, sensing the gravity of the situation, took a seat beside me, his hand gently squeezing mine for support. "Where do I even begin?" My mother started, her voice trembling. "There are so many things I should have told you a long time ago, but I was scared. Scared of how you would react, scared of losing you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "Just tell me the truth, Mom. I deserve that much." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "The man who was here tonight, his name is Robert. He's your biological father." The room seemed to spin around me. I had always believed that the man who raised me was my real father. The idea that my entire understanding of my family was based on a lie was almost too much to bear. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Your father, the man who raised you, loved you as his own," she said. "We both did. But when Robert and I were young, we had a brief relationship. When I found out I was pregnant, Robert and I had already broken up. Your father and I were married by then, and he wanted to raise you as his own. We thought it was the best thing for everyone." I looked at my husband, his face reflecting the shock and confusion I felt. "So all these years, you both kept this secret from me?" "Yes," she admitted. "But it wasn't just to protect you. It was to protect our family. Robert agreed to stay away, but now he feels you have a right to know the truth." I sat back, trying to process everything. My entire life had been a series of half-truths and hidden stories. But amidst the confusion, one thing became clear: my parents had always acted out of love, even if their choices were flawed. "I need to talk to Robert," I said finally. "I need to understand his side of the story." My mother nodded. He said he'd be willing to meet you whenever you're ready. The following weekend, I met Robert at a small cafe. He was waiting at a corner table, his expression nervous yet hopeful. As I approached, he stood up and extended his hand. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice earnest. We sat down, and over the next few hours, Robert shared his side of the story. He spoke of his regret, his longing to be part of my life, and his respect for the decision my parents had made. Despite the years apart, there was a sincerity in his words that resonated with me. As we talked, I began to see him not as a stranger, but as a part of my story that I had been missing. By the end of our conversation, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about choosing between two fathers, it was about understanding my past and embracing the future with a fuller heart. When I returned home, my husband greeted me with a warm hug. "How did it go?" he asked. "It was enlightening," I replied. "I think I understand things better now." In the following weeks, my relationship with my mother began to heal. We had long, honest conversations, and I started to forgive her for the years of secrecy. My father, the man who had raised me, was supportive throughout, reaffirming his unconditional love. Robert slowly became part of my life, too. He didn't try to replace my father but instead found his own place in my heart. Together, we navigated this new chapter, building a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. As time passed, the wounds of the past began to mend, and my family grew stronger, united by the truth and a newfound understanding. The pain of betrayal was replaced by the joy of reconnection, and the sense of a complete family brought a deep sense of peace. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or secrets. It was about love, forgiveness, and the realization that family is not just about blood but about the connections we choose to nurture. And with that realization, I found my happy ending.
Story 2. I, 32M, was married to my wife, 33F, for 4 years, and up until recently, we had what I believed was a great marriage. I was madly in love with her, and we shared a deep bond that I thought was unbreakable. However, everything changed when she fell into a deep depression in 2022, mainly due to her job. Seeing her suffer was heartbreaking, and I wanted to do everything I could to help her. I suggested that she start going to the gym or engage in any kind of sport to help alleviate her stress. I had gone through my own episode of depression before we got married, and working out had been my savior. She agreed, and we started going to the gym together. Unfortunately, I couldn't go as often as I wanted because my workload had increased significantly after a recent promotion. Still, I tried my best to support her and be there whenever I could. At the beginning of our gym journey, she was a bit chubby, which I loved about her. But as she started to see changes in her body, she became more dedicated to her workouts. It wasn't long before her depression began to lift, and she became happier and more lively. I was thrilled to see her transformation and to witness her newfound confidence. Our relationship even benefited from this, as she became more aggressive and enthusiastic in bed. However, as her confidence grew, it began to negatively affect our relationship. She started going out to parties more frequently and neglected her share of the household responsibilities. I first noticed a real problem when I saw her flirting with a guy at a meetup we attended together. I tried to communicate my feelings to her, but she dismissed them outright. After several such incidents, I sat her down and told her that she seemed to be riding high on her newfound confidence and emotions. I warned her not to make any major decisions or take actions based solely on these feelings. I spoke from experience, having been extremely emotionally driven in the past. I suggested we go to a marriage counselor to work through our issues, but that's when things took a turn for the worse. She erupted in anger, saying vile things like how she realized she had settled for me and could do much better now that she was in shape. She accused me of being insecure and said many other hurtful things. This woman, who had once been the sweetest person on earth, had transformed into someone unrecognizable. I was shocked and devastated by her words. The following month, she filed for divorce. Since then, our only communication has been through our lawyers. Our court hearing is scheduled for next month, and my lawyer has told me there's a high chance the divorce will be finalized then. We have similar incomes, our only shared asset is a joint account, and we have no kids. The house is my mom's, so it's not subject to division. I resigned myself to the fact that my marriage was ending. But last week, out of the blue, she called me, crying and telling me she regrets everything. She apologized repeatedly, but all I felt was disappointment. Not anger, not sadness, just pure disappointment. She hadn't reached out to me once since the divorce proceedings began, and I had no idea where she had been living. I told her there was no going back. Since then, she has been messaging me non-stop. My family supports my decision and believes I shouldn't back down. Even my in-laws, who were shocked to hear about the divorce, are now telling me to reconsider everything. As I sit here, pondering my next steps, I feel torn between the love I once had for her and the betrayal I still feel. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know I need to make a decision soon. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. I struggled to make sense of my shattered marriage and the sudden influx of apologies from my estranged wife. Her calls and messages became a relentless barrage, each one reopening wounds I thought had begun to heal. Despite my family's unwavering support and my in-laws' pleas for reconciliation, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of doubt and uncertainty. Could I ever trust her again after the hurtful words she had hurled at me? Did she truly regret her actions, or was this just another fleeting moment of remorse? I spent sleepless nights mulling over our past, replaying memories in my mind, searching for answers that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. And then, just when I thought I had reached a decision, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. One evening, as I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, contemplating the wreckage of my marriage, there was a knock at the door. I frowned, wondering who could be visiting at such a late hour. With hesitant steps, I approached the door and cautiously peered through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her standing there, her face bathed in the soft glow of the porch light. It was my wife, her eyes filled with tears and her expression a mixture of sorrow and desperation. Despite my initial instinct to turn her away, I found myself unlocking the door and swinging it open. "Can we talk?" she whispered, her voice barely above a hoarse whisper. I hesitated, torn between the desire to slam the door shut and the need to finally confront the woman who had turned my world upside down. In the end, curiosity won out, and I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air between us. And then, with a trembling sigh, she began to speak. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I can't begin to apologize enough for the pain I caused. But please, hear me out. There's something you need to know." I listened, my heart pounding in my chest, as she poured out her soul, confessing secrets she had kept hidden for far too long. With each revelation, my world tilted on its axis, and I struggled to comprehend the depths of her deception. And then, just as I thought I had heard it all, she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Please, give me another chance." I sat there, stunned into silence, as the weight of her words washed over me. Was this the turning point I had been waiting for, or was it just another cruel twist of fate? Only time would tell. As she reached out a trembling hand, her eyes pleading for forgiveness, I found myself teetering on the edge of a precipice, torn between the past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. And then, with a resolve born of newfound clarity, I made a decision that would change everything. As my wife's words hung heavy in the air, I grappled with a tumult of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to believe her, to embrace the possibility of reconciliation and a second chance at happiness. But another part, hardened by the pain of betrayal, remained wary of the scars that still lingered beneath the surface. "I don't know if I can do this," I confessed, my voice raw with emotion. "The hurt runs deep, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to trust you again." Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached out, grasping my hand with trembling fingers. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Just give me a chance to make things right." Her words echoed in the silence of the room, each syllable heavy with the weight of unspoken promises and shattered dreams. And as I gazed into her tear-filled eyes, I felt a flicker of something stir within me, a glimmer of hope amidst the wreckage of our broken marriage. But before I could respond, a sudden noise shattered the fragile peace of our reunion. It was the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut, followed by the echoing footsteps of someone entering the house. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned towards the doorway, my senses on high alert. Who could be intruding on this intimate moment between my wife and me? And what did their unexpected arrival portend for our fragile reconciliation? As the footsteps drew nearer, I braced myself for the revelation that awaited, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. Was it a friend, a family member, or someone else entirely? And what secrets did they bring with them, hidden beneath the cloak of their sudden appearance? With bated breath, I waited for the newcomer to reveal themselves, knowing that their presence held the key to unlocking the mysteries that still lingered between my wife and me. And as the tension mounted, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of a new chapter in our tumultuous love story, or the final nail in the coffin of our shattered dreams? The answer lay just beyond the threshold, waiting to be discovered. But until then, all I could do was wait, my heart poised on the precipice of uncertainty, ready to face whatever fate had in store. As the footsteps drew closer, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that whatever lay on the other side of that door could shatter the fragile illusion of hope that had begun to take root within me. And then, with a creak of hinges, the door swung open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dimly lit hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the familiar face staring back at me, a face I had prayed never to see again. It was her, the woman who had torn my life apart with her lies and deceit. The same woman who had shattered my trust and left me broken and alone. And as her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal wash over me. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. She hesitated, her gaze flickering between me and my wife, who sat beside me, her expression a mask of apprehension. "I came to talk to you," she stammered, her voice tinged with unease. "I need to explain," but before she could finish, my wife rose to her feet, her eyes flashing with determination. "You have no right to be here," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You lost that privilege the moment you walked out on him." The intruder recoiled, her face contorted with a mixture of guilt and shame. "I know I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But her words were cut short by a sudden commotion from the hallway. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I turned to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway, a figure I had prayed never to see again. It was him, my wife's former lover, the man whose presence had cast a shadow over our marriage and driven a wedge between us. And as he stepped into the room, his eyes locked on my wife, I felt a wave of despair wash over me, knowing that our fragile reconciliation had been shattered beyond repair. In that moment, I realized that no amount of apologies or explanations could undo the damage that had been done. Our marriage was irreparably broken, torn apart by the lies and betrayals that had festered beneath the surface for far too long. And as I watched my wife and her former lover embrace, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, I knew that it was time to let go of the dreams we had once shared, and to embrace the painful reality of our shattered love. With a heavy heart, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the shattered remnants of a life that had once been filled with hope and promise. And as I stepped out into the cold night air, I knew that this was not just the end of our marriage, but the end of a chapter in my life, a chapter that I would never be able to forget, no matter how hard I tried.